Oh, it says we're live.
All right.
Let's. Is it showing that we're live on your page? Or on, oh, great. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Lori Beth, and this is episode number 48 of Exploring Genuine Transformation. For those of you who don't know me, I am a psychotherapist and a psychospiritual mentor, and I work with women to resolve lifelong trauma so they can stop being a self-development project and start living their lives now. And I'm very, I work with trauma and the body and all kinds of other spiritual and therapeutic tools. So that's who I am. And this show is a show I do weekly where I interview different coaches, thought leaders, therapists in the realm of transformation. And what I'm interested in here is in talking about transformation from the inside out versus transformation for the sake of getting what you want. Sometimes we do get what we want as a natural byproduct of developing more intimacy and peace and well-being within. So I'm really excited today to be here with Paul Weinfield. I asked your name and I probably said it wrong. And yeah, so I want to introduce, so thank you for being here, first of all.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah. And so I want to start by, before we get into our topic for today, I want to start by introducing Paul. Paul is a musician, a life coach, and a meditation teacher. And he has been a practitioner of the Thai forest tradition, which is a Buddhist tradition, since 2005, I think. Is that right? And that is the lineage in which he's teaching in. And I actually have a personal connection to this lineage from my many years of practice. And this is in the Theravadan tradition. So when I first discovered Paul online, I feel like I discovered, I just feel like your writings and your teachings are gold, and they've personally been really supportive to me in my life. And I think in part because you're really bringing in Buddhist wisdom and how to work with the mind, with like how to just using that in practical ways, very, very practical ways. And I find that your writings, I'm just continually inspired by them. And in part, I'm inspired because I can actually make use of them. And I think a lot of other people can too. And they're just and you're always referencing teachers that I've heard of and, teachings that are relevant, but really bringing it into our everyday life of 2020, which is also really, really powerful. I think when a teacher can do that, being able to obviously bring these ancient wisdom teachings into, the now. And so I'm really excited to interview you and to have other people who haven't experienced you, or maybe who have, to experience, some of the wisdom and these practical bits that they can start using in their life now. So thank you for being here.
It's great again. Yeah.
And I think I want to just add, because I know that you wrote a book, and that's important too. So Paul also wrote a book that is about mindfulness in daily life, if you want to check that out. And it's called The Magpie Art, Gathering the Brightness of Every Day. So today we're going to talk about the transformational art of listening. And in this topic, we're really going to be focusing on, first of all, what transformational listening is. And Paul has, different ways that he will share about that. And then also, how that's an inner and an outer practice, and how important it is, especially right now in this divisive and fearful and unknown environment of the pandemic, of, you know, um, Black people being killed, the political climate, like just the stuff that we're really up against right now. So, yeah, let's get started. So I think the first place to start would be if you want to, first of all, do you want to say anything more about yourself or your background, that you feel like would be relevant for people to know?
Let's just dive right in.
Okay, cool. So let's start with what the art of transformational listening from your perspective is.
Yeah. So I'm going to say it in a kind of Buddhist way, and then I'll just say it in a more conversational way. To me, listening is a kind of karma. It's an action. Like when we listen to people, it's an action that has all kinds of consequences in the present moment, but also in the future. When we listen thoughtfully and compassionately, not only do we really help the other person, we help ourselves, and we create patterns that are going to have long-term effects. That, as one of my teachers says, that it casts wide ripples. We don't normally think about listening as an action, or if we think about it as an action, we think about it just simply in terms of like, well, the other person's talking, so I should be a good guy and just kind of listen to them, right? But we don't think enough about how we could possibly be transforming a situation by the way we listen, simply by the way we listen, and we have a very limited concept of action in the West. We think of action as things that, you can do that can be seen, because we're very into like being seen by other people, right? So like, going to a protest is an action, and we say, oh, that's activism, or or writing a post on Facebook, that's an action, that's activism. But we really kind of narrow the scope of what action is, because the bottom line is most of the actions we take are in our minds. Most of our actions are mental actions. They're done without any evidence in the outer world of what can be seen or heard or read. So we do ourselves a disservice by narrowing the scope, and we also tend to feel very disempowered when we narrow the scope of what we think action is. So that's why a lot of people will often think of listening as a position of weakness. It's like, oh, this person's talking and I have to listen. This means I have to sort of submit.
Mm-hmm.
So when we start to understand that listening is transformational, we're in a position where not only can we really change the world, but we also can change our position in the way we dialogue with other people. It's less of like, I got to sit through what this guy is saying. And it's more of, no, actually, I'm an equal player here, even before I open my mouth. Mm-hmm. So that's just some ways of thinking about transformational listening.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so beautiful. I mean, I think overall the concept that you're bringing up, that we have learned, I think all of us have been trained that these actions are very external and it's what you see. And so we also then take on, unfortunately, I think we internalize being more performative versus like all the things that are happening through our day, right? Like listening being a huge one of them, where like you said, we're actually orienting to everything, that every moment, right, as an action, you could say. I mean, in this case, we're talking about listening, right? But you can orient to it in that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the Buddha said that there are three sort of levels to action. There's bodily, there's verbal, and there's mental. And they're kind of all actually at play when we're listening. Like, you're talking, or you were talking a moment ago, and really was just trying to be present with what you were saying, but there's a lot going on in being present. It's not just sort of like sitting really still. Yeah. It's how I breathe. Like, am I breathing in harmony with what you're saying? Or am I trying to create harmony in how I breathe? So that's the bodily level. Like, that's how I'm embodying the listening. And there's the verbal level, which even though words aren't coming out of my mouth, I'm talking to myself. I could be saying, I could be criticizing you. I could be criticizing me. Like, oh, I'm so stupid. I didn't pick up on what she was saying. Or I could be talking to myself with love, And then there's the mental level, which is like, how am I perceiving this whole interaction? Am I perceiving it as a waste of time, or just, something I got to endure? Or am I perceiving it as really an opportunity to learn, and an opportunity to take skillful action, to take good actions. So there's so much going on when we're listening, right? Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, I love that you just, use that moment as an example. Do you want to say a little bit more about, you were just in that, as you were explaining that like being present, right? Because that's one of the, I mean, first of all, you could maybe speak to like what you want to say a little bit more about the components of transformational listening. And one of them would be presence, I know. Then we can maybe get more into like, how do we actually treat those as an action? How do we learn to um, listen in those ways?
Right. Right. Well, I mean, I think maybe one place to start is that the mind is always leaving the present moment. It's always jumping into thoughts, and to some extent, that's a natural process. But to some extent, it's just our conditioning. So we can recondition the way the mind relates to a situation. We don't have to just kind of be swept away by our thoughts. Ajahn Fuang used to say that, that mindfulness is like having one foot in the present moment. Your other foot might be thinking about what you have to do later. Like, we do have to have thoughts. It's not that we are just purely present. We want to have like one foot in the present moment. And the way to do that, from my point of view, is just to stay connected with the breath. So I guess I kind of want to say that if you forget everything else of what I'm saying, or person listening just wants to get the the gist, it's really just keep the breath in mind as you listen, and notice how that really deepens your capacity to be present and to show up. So presence is it's always like a work in progress. We're never just present or not present, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then do you want me to talk about what are some ways that are the different layers of
Yeah,
transformational listening?
sure. Yeah.
And again, and I just also want to preface this by saying there are always many ways to think about things. It's not like this is the way you have to think. But for me, it's helpful to explore that again, listening is an action, and there are different ways to listen. And at different times, different ways of listening might be more or less appropriate. And the things you can do, it's like you have a toolbox. You're not going to use every tool all the time, but it's good to know what the different tools do. So one way, that to think about listening is just being present. And it's just holding space. And I think I've talked a little bit about that already. Just really making the other person feel like you're there for them without trying to fix them or give them advice, just being there for them. That in and of itself is an enormous gift. I've known many people who maybe weren't super intellectual or super, you know, uh, didn't talk a lot about healing modalities or all kinds of the stuff that we tend to get very heady about, but just really made me feel heard, and just understanding what a gift that is, just to hold space for another human being. So that's a very important level just on its own. Then I think there's the level of really listening for something, because we're always listening for something. We're never just like, oh, I'm listening. We're trying to find something in the other person's words and body language. And I think listening for feelings and needs that's a really important skill to develop. Um, Many people listening probably know of Marshall Rosenberg and nonviolent communication. His work is really around how do we listen for other people's feelings and needs and our own, even when we're in situations where people might be yelling at us, or might be in despair. Really sort of getting behind that surface level and really listening. So what is this person feeling right now? What does this person need right now? And understanding that when we connect with people on that level, we always just empathy is sort of a natural byproduct of that. We don't have to agree with the other person's views and opinions, but when we see them in their feelings and their needs, there's this natural compassion. There's naturally empathy. So that's a real gift to other people and to yourself, to be able to listen for feelings and needs. And then the last piece, which I would just describe, I know I'm throwing a lot into the mix at once, so I want to be quiet in a second and listen. Um, but the last piece is what I would, call more transformational listening, which is listening to the other person, not in terms of who you think they are right now, but in terms of what they might become one day. Because we tend to like make these very snap judgments. It's like, oh, I see that you are agitated right now, so I'm going to judge you as a person who's not really, at peace. Or you're saying something critical, so I'm going to judge you as a judgmental person, right? Getting beyond that to this person I'm talking to has so much possibility. I don't know for sure whether this person will actually develop these qualities, but can I see those potentials for wisdom and for self-reflection and for great joy and compassion? Can I really see those potentials in the other person even as they're talking? That's also a big gift to the other person and to ourselves. So many ways to listen, but there's so much that's possible when we start to see listening as a skill rather than just like, oh yeah, it's not my turn to speak yet, so I'm just going to be quiet. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I'm like, I love what you're saying. You can keep talking. No, yeah, it's interesting. As you're talking, I'm aware of my own listening and what's actually going on in my own body. And so I'll just add this to the mix that, part of, for me, being present is actually allowing the energy to go down and being more in my kind of lower body and my belly, which is also a tool that I give people just in terms of regulating your nervous system. But I find that the more I'm kind of like in this lower part of my body in the earth, the more I'm here, the
Right.
more I'm listening. Yeah,
Yeah.
the more I'm like actually listening to what you're saying. I'm not thinking of the next thing. I'm not one step ahead of myself. And then I was also just thinking that I often think about, at least trauma and healing work. I liken it quite a bit to being with an unconsolable child. And if you're with an unconsolable child, you have to regulate your own nervous system, basically, in order to actually, it's another form of listening, right? You're listening for you're trying different things in that case, right? Like that's how I see it. You're kind of, okay, how do I really just be present? I might not be able to do anything right now except continue to do my best at just being here and being present and loving and being compassionate towards this being, right?
Yeah.
So that was another thing that came through.
I love that metaphor. That really, that sort of something clicked in me when I was listening to that. There's a sense of there's wisdom in that, I think, and also just there's sensitivity, because when a child is crying, you have to sort of try different things and pay attention to your own responses to things. And I think that's very true. I think the unconsolable child is very much present in our world right now. Right.
Yeah. And that just made me think that part of when you were talking about how transformational, like how listening becomes transformational, one, I love that, like that we're seeing the potential, but it's also that if you liken it to being with what you just said about being with a sort of crying child, you're then, just thinking, you're then, you're offering this gift of like, you're offering a gift to them. It's like a certain kind of listening, which I feel like is what you're talking about. Like, it's like you're offering the gift of like, I'm here with you. It's okay, whatever you're experiencing. And even like with what we were, what we'll continue to talk about, like, it's unknown right now. It's scary, right? It's like all those same kind of same qualities. And how much we offer to I think we offer a lot to ourselves when we're doing that as well. I find when I'm being with another human, whether it's a child or an adult, and I'm regulating my own nervous system, I'm receiving so much, because through our exchange, there's a flow of calmness and peace and regulation, right? Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. And what you mentioned about the time that we're living in, I think is super important, because I think a lot, not everything is what it seems right now. And very often, if I find myself in a difficult conversation with somebody about politics or the pandemic or something like that, it's so helpful for me just to recognize that this other person's probably scared, you know,
Mhm. Yeah.
and and their needs are not getting met, and they're having a reaction. It's not really about me. It's not about, do I agree with this person, or is this person saying the words I want to hear. And there's so much reactivity that we do around that. And you see it everywhere. It's like that I have to fight that person because that person didn't say things the way I wanted it to be said, right? And it's like, how are we ever going to get through this if that's the way we listen to each other, right? And just recognizing other people's fear, recognizing that everyone you meet is fighting a hard battle,
Yeah.
seeing that as possibility, not just, oh, this person's scared and they're useless, but this person is scared and also has a lot of potential that, if they can soothe their fear, can
Yeah.
really come out,
Mhm.
really be for the good of themselves and for all humans.
Yeah, and then and to add to that, right, then the transformational listening piece, that um, if we are then listening in a way, like you said, that is actually looking for the feelings and needs, or seeing their potential, or seeing what's really going on for them and going past the words, then together, again, we're creating, like, we're offering peace to the world in a certain way, right? Because we're not responding in a, like, this is where it starts, is in these conversations, right? Like, the more we're at war with each other, right, and then we're speaking in these kind of ways where we're at odds and it's all about the words and we're conflicted, we're actually doing exactly what most of us are really, what we're actually talking about in the first place, which is like, this is where, what I think the world needs, this is where the world needs to be, or this is what needs to happen in order for there to be more peace and well-being and for everybody to have their needs met. So it's this interesting, yeah.
I told this story to a meditation class. This was back after George Floyd was killed. I live in Lower Manhattan, and there were helicopters during the protest that were circling my building, all night. And I was starting to really kind of lose it, because they were all night long. There was just this reverberation. If you ever stand really close to a helicopter, it's like the reverberations are really intense. And I gave this talk to my meditation class about something that's in the Dhammapada, where it says that an enlightened person is like a cracked bell. If you try to hit a cracked bell, it doesn't reverberate. And how most of the time we're like bells that reverberate really loudly, right? Something happens in the world, and like it gets under our skin, and we just reverberate along with it. It's like there's fear, and then we're just vibrating with fear, or there's hatred, we're vibrating with hatred. And it's such a huge gift to the world to be that cracked bell, even if you can't do it perfectly, to just be like, okay, there's fear, but I'm not vibrating with that. Or there's hatred, but I'm not vibrating with that. Or there's intolerance, but I'm not vibrating with that. Is, I mean, again, these are things that you can't post on Instagram stories, right? But they are huge value to the world.
Mm-hmm. That makes me, when you were talking before, I was thinking about, especially because of obviously the Buddhist teachings, but identification, and that feels like what you're speaking to right now, right? That you can notice the fear, you could notice in that moment how it was getting under your skin, and that part of the teachings, right, is to, okay, this is happening, but I don't need to become it. I don't need it for it to be my entire reality, which is also what I see happening right now in our world. Like, people are overcome by the emotions that are coming up, right, or that they're feeling, overcome by how terrible certain things are in the world right now, how hard it is.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're absolutely right. I mean, identification is sort of at the root of the problem, right? And again, we're taught the opposite. We're taught that you have to have a very strong identity, and who you are is really important. And, especially when the world is unstable, what you need to do is grab onto an identity and assert it even more. And we don't really look at what these things do. My teacher always says it's like, a lot of our thinking, it's like you get this vacuum cleaner from your aunt, like years ago, and you keep using it and you never really look, is it actually picking up dirt? And so many responses to what's happening in the world right now are like that. It's like people they just say it. Well, this is what you have to do. You have to, grab onto an identity, be really loud and vocal, scream at a lot of people, and the world will change. And we never actually look like, does that actually work? Right. Or does it actually become part of the problem? And so, I mean, I always just say, like, don't listen to me, just look and see. As long as you're looking and seeing, right? That's good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so we're talking about listening, but I wonder, I mean, because I'm thinking like there's a, well, one, maybe we can talk about this more in depth, but there's an inner listening, right? Because there's listening between two people, but there's also an inner listening to our own reactivity, right? Or to our own responses to things. And I think what I was just thinking, right, is like I mean, maybe you could talk some about that kind of inner listening that even just happens in our own company, and then also how we then can, because I think that in that inner listening, right, we then can make a choice to respond in a certain way or not, if we're truly able to listen to ourselves. And then some of the ways we might be posting or talking with other people or engaging could change because we're actually first in a process of listening to ourselves in a way that's transformative.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think there's so much connection between the way we listen to others and the way that we listen to ourselves. And it goes in both directions. As we listen to ourselves more compassionately, we can listen to others more compassionately. As we listen to others more compassionately, we can listen to ourselves more compassionately. Listening to ourselves is actually much rarer than we think it is, right? Most of the time we go from one thought to the next without listening. It's like literally having a conversation with somebody who won't let you get a word in edgewise. We are that person with ourselves. We're constantly talking about what he did or she said or what's unfair about this, and rarely do we just ask, like, so how am I feeling right now? Oh, maybe I'm feeling lonely.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I'm feeling sad, or maybe I'm feeling scared. Whatever it is, we don't make space for that kind of listening. So it's no wonder that that when we talk to other people, we kind of are constantly filling in the gaps and filling up the silences as well. So it goes both directions. I think practicing conversation with other people is a great way to train your mind, and training your mind is a great way to have deeper and more meaningful conversations with other people.
Mm-hmm. It's also a way, I mean, I would also just add from my own experience is that I find that I actually personally have a much more conflictual, like I have a harder time with myself than I would say that I do in my, relating to others.
Mm.
So that's what I'm always aware of. That's why I think this question feels, this topic of the inner listening feels also so important. I mean, I do think it can go both ways, but I think sometimes we can be better at one than the other, or like I find when I'm relating to people that feels more easeful. And then, I spend a lot of time alone, and then I'm like, wow, I'm identifying with this. And now I'm watching the mind do the thing that it does, or I'm, not catching certain ways that my mind is, what it's saying to myself. Right. So yeah, it does seem like I mean, personally, I feel it to be like such an important process, and something that I see in a lot of my clients. It just feels like, and friends and everybody, right? It feels like it's very challenging for people to catch, to even like bring that kind of mindfulness to like, oh, I was feeling this, and then I was like immediately hard on myself about it, right? Or I was feeling really angry, and then I got caught in a whole story about the anger, and then I'm feeling even more angry, and then I go and do this action, right? Like, so it's kind of that same cause and effect. Mm-hmm.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, so one thing that I think is really helpful for me is just that the understanding that the mind has many minds. As one of my teachers says, like the mind's like a committee, and it's not, at least at first, it's not a democracy. what happens is certain members of the committee hijack the meetings, and those are the voices of self-judgment or self-blame or self-doubt. And sometimes the first order of business is just getting them to be quiet for a minute, like, okay, you've been taking up, 99% of the meeting screaming, but we haven't heard from lots of other voices. And to me, that's really what meditation is. It's basically, it's that calming process where you can get some of the members of the inner committee to be quiet so that you can actually hear from some of the parts of the mind that you don't normally hear from.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And before I was meditating, I didn't really realize that I was angry. I had a whole very dominating part of my committee that was just like, everything's fine, this person's this way, that way. And it was like, there's these other members of the committee that were just kind of stewing in anger. And I didn't realize that, until, so we all have our protectors, right? Our voices,
Yeah.
and they're just screaming. And so it's hard to listen when that's happening.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Can you just, by way of example, talk about how when you did start meditating and realize that there was this anger, how that shifted your experience to then how did that shift the way that you were relating to yourself and relating to others?
Yeah. Well, I think for me, the big lesson is always that it's really just about seeing clearly. There's not I think one of the things that in self-help communities is often, it's like the elephant in the room that no one wants to talk about, is that everybody wants to fix their emotions. Like they want to have a shiny set of emotions that they can, again, show to other people, and then they'll feel better about themselves. But I always say that you don't have to do anything about your feelings. You really just have to let them be and see them for what they are. So I think the same thing is with anger. I mean, when you really look at anger, you see that it's worthy of your compassion. It's just in my case, it's a scared, frightened 9-year-old boy. It's really, really trying to let people know that things aren't okay and people aren't paying attention to what he's saying. So he's getting really angry. I don't have to exile him. I don't have to turn him into something really, happy and cheerful. I just need to acknowledge that I see him. I see that he's trying to get my attention. I see that he's trying to communicate his needs. And then once I see that, then he settles down, or at least he takes up less of my experience. I don't have to do anything about him. It's not like, you're right. It's like people sometimes will talk about a problem child, right? And that's what we do with our feelings. We make our feelings into like these problem children that we have to like somehow reform,
Mm-hmm.
I see it.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I'm really on board with you around having been someone who has been involved in a lot of in practice for a long time, but then also had a part of me that was always trying to fix and heal, which is why I try to support others and not going down that track. Just more and more I see that obviously there are things like most of what's healing is actually just being present with our experience, like slowing down enough. There's lots of ways to do that, of course, and there are different healing modalities that can support that. But I think when it comes down to it, that's what a lot of them are at the root of it. Like that's where the change happens, is bringing in more compassion and being able, like when the nervous system is dysregulated, being able to have different tools, right? Or, and you can get some of that through different meditative practices as well. But yeah, it was interesting. I was thinking as you were talking as well, that the way that this relates to the kind of then when we're listening to someone else, especially during these times, is that, for example, if you were not aware of that angry child, you might be in a conversation with somebody and that angry child then takes, right, you're in this kind of like, I think this and you think this, especially in today's world with what's happening. And I think this is happening a lot. This example. And then without that awareness, then without that inner listening, you then and then if you're not truly listening to them, if you're not able to, right, if you weren't able to notice, oh, that's that angry part coming up. Okay, I'm just going to let that be. And I'm going to go back to really hearing this person and hearing what's going on for them. Then all of a sudden, if you didn't have that, then the angry child would be center stage and you would be responding from that. And unfortunately, I think that's a lot of what's happening. Our inner children are actually the ones running the show right now in a lot of these kinds of divisive conversations and opinions and ideas that are going back and forth.
Totally. I'm so happy you said that, because that's, I think, such a key to understanding what's happening right now. And, it's weird. It's like it's almost, it's not a contradiction. It's almost, but it's ironic that we don't pay attention to our inner children and then we put them in charge. Right. So it's like, in a way we don't let our inner children be children. And also we don't act like adults. So there's real benefit to understanding that you have to be an adult in the whole situation that's going on inside you, which means paying attention to your inner children, but not putting them behind the wheel of the car, and that's really important work, because I think there's only so much inner child healing you can do if you keep putting your inner children behind the wheel of the car in situations where they're not prepared to be in charge.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think sometimes I've spoken up about this particular topic a bit, and I think because I've seen it again and again, I think sometimes when we do a lot of inner child work, we sometimes are not aware that we start to reference the inner child and we're actually giving them center stage. And so it's like, it's such an art and a dance, I think, once you sort of recognize those parts of you, to be able to, soothe the inner child. And also sometimes I do this with my clients. Sometimes it's like, we're going there too much. And it's like, we need the adult to come in, and the adult actually needs to be fierce right now. The adult does not need, in the same way that you would be with an out of control child, you would be compassionate, but you're not going to be like, oh, you're going to be like, I cannot let you throw that against the wall. You're going to hurt yourself. You're going to have more force.
Totally.
So yeah.
Totally.
I think.
Yeah. I mean, like, and there's so many practical ways where this is what I love about, the Buddhist teachings. I mean, there's so many, he doesn't talk about inner children, but there's so many ways where there's this interplay between like the parts of you that really have to take responsibility, and then the things that you can also just have compassion for without trying to fix. And one way, like, for example, is keeping your word. I mean, that's been a big one for me in my practice. It's like the inner child doesn't always want to keep their word, right? Doesn't want to go to things that they've committed to, doesn't want to, show up on time, all that kind of stuff. But when you let the inner child drive the car in that way, the inner child actually doesn't have boundaries and actually becomes more fearful and more like, more activated and more sort of dysregulated. So sometimes you just have to be like, I said I was going to do it, so I'm going to do it. And that's a very practical but very deep way of working with some of these childlike parts that we have.
It's interesting. That makes me think of the discipline that's found in, obviously, like long-term practice, or even in, whether you're on like a long retreat or even in your daily life, because and in renunciation, like all different kinds of aspects, right? Or looking at the paramitas, like different spiritual qualities that you're developing, right? It's like, it takes, like, I can be impatient, right? And so then I have to keep coming back as a practice to like, wow, okay, I responded impatiently in this situation. And but because there's a kind of, to me, that's a commitment, right? Like if I say to myself, okay, I'm aware of this, and now I'm working with it with compassion, obviously. And that also just brought up something for me when you said the word practice. I feel like when we're talking about like Buddhist practice, we talk about it as practice. We don't often do that when we're talking about healing. And I actually just wrote a post about, it just came through today, about emotional regulation, I think being the foundation of, all basically healthy development and living and healing, but that I feel like it's an art and a practice. How do we actually like engage with our lives as a practice versus as something where we're trying to get somewhere? Like even with this listening, right? It's like everything that we've been sharing today, it's like, this is a practice. Like this is something that we're all going to be always engaging in, and we're going to be reacting in certain ways in moments, no matter how long you've practiced it, right? And then we're going to be like, oh, I just reacted there. Okay. We're going to be hard on ourselves in certain moments, right? But that we get to just, so I think, I don't know, that just came through as something important, like how to engage as a practice.
Totally. I mean, that I don't think culturally we're conditioned to really think in terms of practices. We're a consumer culture, first of all. So we think of consuming healing. So it's like, I want to buy that healing for $99 and then I won't ever have to do it again, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then also like just understanding that yeah, it's these things take repetition and we have to learn to love the repetition, in the same way that we would love doing art or playing the piano, or you don't say, I'd play the piano once, so I'm not going to do it again, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we have to learn to love healing as a repeated practice.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what you're saying is this about listening is the same thing. It's it's that, like, we're going to be doing a lot of listening in our lives. We have to learn to love it and to deepen into it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm wondering if we talked, you talked about how you see the art of transformational listening, like what the components are. And I think we have given some examples, and I'm wondering if, I don't know if you have any practical tips for people around really being able to bring some of this into practice in their lives. Like, I don't know if there's a more, we talked, I think we talked a little bit more in depth about presence, and there's obviously, but you could say more. I mean, you could, right? I'm sure there's many ways that you work with people around how to be present, how to listen for feelings and needs, how to be when you find yourself reactive and not able to listen, how do you kind of come back? How do you bring your attention back to that? And then, how do you see someone's potential? That was the last thing that you said.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I can put it under two headings, and I'll try to be really practical about this, but again, I'll say it first the Buddhist way, and then I'll try to make it more practical. But to me, it's mindfulness and it's heedfulness. So mindfulness means, the repetitive practice of keeping something in mind. So you have to remember to do this, right? And how do you remember to remember? Well, it's a muscle, like anything else. So things like meditation are really good for strengthening that muscle of mindfulness, so that when you find yourself in a difficult conversation, it's like you remember to breathe. And then as you remember to breathe, you remember all the other parts of, skillful listening. So to some extent, it's muscle memory, and you have to develop that muscle memory. Otherwise, it's like you hear someone talk about it once, and then maybe the next time you think about it is a year later, right? So in the you have to develop that kind of daily practice of like remembering to listen, remembering to receive information, remembering to stay present. So meditation is really important. I mean, I don't think there's any skill in the world for developing mindfulness like meditation. Obviously therapy can help clear away some of the obstacles to mindfulness, but at some point it's like putting in your reps at the gym. Like, you have to do enough mindfulness practice so that you can be mindful in daily life situations. So there's that, and it's really important, because I think we try to take the lessons from meditation without actually doing the meditation. I think the time we spend on the cushion is super important. The second thing is heedfulness, which basically means remembering that your actions are really important. And that's sort of where I started earlier, that when you're listening, when no one's watching, when it's just you and your thoughts, like what you're doing is really, really important. It's shaping who you're becoming. It's shaping what the world is becoming. It has enormous power, and you don't want to treat that power carelessly. You want to have a healthy fear of the dangers that can come from totally neglecting that power and just thinking any way you want to, speaking any way you want to, acting any way you want to. You want to have a sense like, this moment is really important. This moment is really important. This moment is really important. So in terms of practical, that's just a lot of talking to yourself, remembering this moment is important.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to lose the thread. Everybody loses the thread, but the more you do it, the more you do it. So, seeing that you can develop, just like you develop in the gym or any kind of muscle, it can be done, and progress, not perfection.
There's something that I love that you said about, just putting in the hours. There's something over the years, people have said to me, a lot of clients, but just people in general will be like, I can't meditate because I have too much going on in my mind. I love that response because I like, obviously, right? Like what's cool about even that response is obviously that is the practice of sitting down and you're already relating to your mind, right? You're already, so if you take what you said, the second piece, heedfulness, right? And karma, what you said at the beginning, that actually every action is important. It's like every moment that your mind is chattering away and you come back to the breath, or, there's various practices, obviously, but, every time that you can gently bring yourself back versus, attacking yourself because, oh my God, I'm so in my thoughts.
Right.
We're already learning this process of what you're speaking about, which is the art of transformational listening, right? Like from the moment that one sits down on the cushion. So there's no time wasted, or there's no like, it's like, oh, because I've been meditating longer, that means that I'm, somewhere more evolved than like, right? It's because every moment, like you said, matters, and it doesn't matter where we're not trying to get somewhere. I mean, we're trying to obviously not create as much karma, but that can happen. It doesn't matter if your mind is going a mile a minute or, or whatever. I don't know what or you're completely present with the breath, without having very many thoughts come in. Like it's the same process. Yeah.
I mean, when people say they're too busy to meditate, usually there's a fear of, again, that's that focusing on identity. It's like a fear of being found out, that they're going to sit down and they're not going to be as mindful as they think they are. And that's like, all of that's unhelpful. I mean, you just have to put all that to the side and just focus on like what good could come of meditating. And what you said I think is totally spot on. It's what good that could come from meditating is learning to listen to yourself, learning how to talk to yourself. If you space out, when you come back to the breath, that's an opportunity to celebrate that you come back to the breath. I mean, that's a moment of awakening, really. You're awakening to where you were and where you were. So there's so much to be gained, I mean, right? It's like kind of saying I'm too busy to meditate. It's like saying I'm too sick to go to the doctor. And it's like, you should probably go to the doctor.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm. And so I'm just thinking about the different components still. I mean, that was I love your response to that. And also that you're bringing in, I do think, I personally think that for me, at least, I've been involved in a lot of different spiritual traditions, but to me, the Buddhist path has really been the most powerful and influential. It's also been the longest and most ongoing for me. But I think in part because there are just so many teachings and practices to really practice what we're speaking about, and being able to, and even in the sense of being able to learn, like for me, it's been like what I need in different moments. Like at this point in my practice, it's like, like if I'm really dysregulated, I actually just need to follow the breath because that actually is calming to the nervous system, right? And then I come back to, so I love that you're just speaking to this as also, we don't want to say exactly as a form of healing, but we can, as a form of being able, it's a foundation for being able to be present, and a foundation for really being able to be compassionate and listen to ourselves and listen to others and create peace within, which is what's needed for us to create kind of this peace without. So.
Yeah. No, it's funny. I mean, what you're saying about having Buddhism having been, the one that's lasted the longest in your life. I mean, sometimes people ask me, I do teach in a lineage. They're like, well, why Buddhism? What about all these other traditions? And all these other traditions have beautiful things in them. And I'm not interested in criticizing. But for me, like what a lot of wisdom is people saying like life could look like this, so live like that. And people are like, but how do I do that? And what's to me is so compassionate about the Buddhist teachings is that there's always this message of there's always something you can do. Like whatever mistakes you've made, wherever you've been, there's always something you can do right now. Wandered from the breath, there's something you can do. If you've committed some horrible crime, there's something you can do. If you're making progress, there's something you can do. So I think to me, that's the message. And you use the word healing because I think that's really what healing is that there's always something you can do to move closer to healing. It's not about did you do it perfectly or not. It's what are you doing right now, you know?
Mhm, mhm, mhm. Yeah, yeah. I think the last thing I'll ask is just, could you say a little bit more about, I don't know what time we're at actually. Oh, wow, we've been going for a while.
Mhm.
Um, could you just say a little bit more about kind of seeing people's potential? Because in some circles, that's like, especially when, let's say somebody looks at the potential of a romantic partner and they're like living in a fantasy, right? And then they're never really with the reality. That can be harmful in moments. And so I wonder how to, if you just have any tips about like when we are listening, what it means to truly listen to someone's potential.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, romantic obsession to me is not about really listening. It's about
Oh, yeah.
imposing. You're imposing your own fantasy on what's going on. I mean, I think to really see someone's potential, first of all, you need to see that they have a separate destiny than you do. If
Yeah.
there's any kind of codependency of like, oh, well, you know, me and this person together, we will progress. Like you have to start there by saying this person's on a totally different path than me. We're all on totally different paths. I can support this person. Maybe this person will support me, but we're on different paths. So that's the first step. But from there, it's really seeing the good in someone. I always say from a distance. Like loving from a distance is hard. We like to love when we're getting all the affection and the attention, but can you really take a step back, and love someone from a distance and see their potential with you taken out of the equation?
Mm.
Hard, but it's important.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah, I think I also said that because I think a lot of people, because it's such a catchphrase
Mhm.
in certain communities, I just
Right.
want to clear that up. And I love what you said, even from listening and seeing their potential from a distance and as a separate being, because I think that is also what we're needing right now. Like that is the core of so I'm glad that this came out. Like that's the core of what I see us needing right now in our world, because it's like people are so over identified with their views, and obviously because they're not feeling safe, and we can go in, we already talked about why, but that it seems like there's like I feel attacked because this person is thinking this and
Right.
feeling this, right? Versus like, can I see that actually we may actually have the same needs, or you know what, they actually are scared for their kids just as much as I am, right? Or they're scared for their job or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you don't have to agree with someone else's views and opinions in order to see their potential. Like it's really not required. In fact, I think we spend too much time measuring how our views and opinions, are the same or different from other people's. Um, the person you're talking to has a capacity for goodness, for compassion, for harmlessness. No matter how much harm they're doing, they have the capacity to not be harmful. And so it takes it takes being willing to think about things in a different way, I think.
Yeah, and the thing we haven't said, which I think might be a good thing to end on because it's so much a part of the Buddhist teachings, but we haven't been talking about this way, is I just got like, it's really listening with your heart versus your mind. So even though we're talking about it as like, here are some mindful ways of doing so, it's like,
Yeah.
I just really got that at the end. Like I was just feeling in my own heart, like that capacity to just open to another human that's in front of me. And that is, I think that's another form of how we, like how we create, I mean, just how we can listen.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah. I mean, listening from the heart is the most important thing, which means setting aside our preferences, setting aside our likes and dislikes. We have to listen from a place that's beyond likes and dislikes.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for this conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Me too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate the work you're doing, and just I'd love for people, can you say like the different offerings you have and how people might follow you if they don't know you, and also other ways to work?
I mean, the best thing is just to follow me on social media, and I sort of put everything in one place. I teach meditation classes 2 nights a week for free. Those are all given freely. So they're online right now because of the pandemic. So anyone, anywhere is welcome to join. Just contact me first so I can give you the info. And then if you're interested in the coaching work that I do, you can contact me about that as well. That's one-on-one. But everything's sort of in one place. So yeah, social media.
And mostly on Facebook or also on Instagram?
I do pretty much about the same on both. So
You do? Okay, great. Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. Yeah.
I really appreciate it.
Yeah. And yeah, I do this show every week and I interview all kinds of people and it's I really enjoy it. So you can tune in again. And if I have I offer classes and groups and one-on-one mentorship work. So you can contact me as well if you are interested in any of that. And yeah, thank you, everyone. Thank you again. Bye.
Bye. Take good care.